Before I start. Is this the first event that you guys are coming out to, or is this your first workshop, or have you been to other ones yet? Nice, nice. Alrighty, then I'll get started. So welcome to An Imposter's Guide to Product Design. I'm pretty sure everyone here has played Among Us at least once in this workshop, and even if you haven't, we all know that feeling like an imposter is stressful, overwhelming, and it just sucks in general. So today I'll be going through some ways that you can get over that product design imposter syndrome and some resources that you can use to really help improve your skills and create really cool and user-centric products. I hope that you can take something away from this workshop, whether it be access to technical skill or a better way to understand your users so that you can implement these in your later projects, whether that be a side project in your internship or hopefully TOHacks 2022. Feel free to ask me any questions in the chat box and I'll answer them to the best of my abilities at any point in the workshop. As well, I'll paste a link of this deck somewhere accessible to you guys so that you can access all of the resources. Everything that's underlined in this workshop is a hyperlink, so feel free to explore and take advantage of all of the resources. So I'm going to introduce myself a bit. I always find it really hard to, do these like icebreakers or introductions, but I guess a couple of things that define me are that I'm a York University student. I'm taking a gap year right now, so I am entering my 4th year in January, and I'll be graduating next year as well. I study international business at the Schulich School of Business, and I am a product designer at TOHacks, so I'm helping to improve the hackathon experience for you all. I'm also wrapping up my internship as a UX designer intern at Mentum, and I'll be starting a internship this fall at Intuit as a content designer. So how I got into product design was that I basically realized that business wasn't the direction I wanted to go into, at least not specifically marketing, which I thought I was going to go into, during my undergrad. However, I was coming from a school that didn't really have much connection to the large tech networks of Canada, and not having studied product design, I felt severe product design imposter syndrome. And in all honesty, I still do. If we're speaking in design thinking terms, I guess my biggest pain point would be that I felt inadequate with the amount of overwhelming resources there were, and there wasn't really a set structure since I wasn't studying it. So with this workshop, I hope that I can lay out some of the most useful resources I use when I'm doing product design in accordance to the design process, and that you can refer to it at any stage in your projects. So like I mentioned, everything underlined is a hyperlinks, and this will be posted later, so feel free to explore. So we'll go over some common myths and misconceptions when it comes to design. I think there's a lot of myths and misconceptions that hold people back from really diving into design, even if you don't consider yourself a designer. And I guess the first major one would be that design equals art, or that you have to be a good artist to be a good designer. When we think of design, I think most people tend to think of the strictly visual aspects, such as graphic design or logo creation. And although these are, practices within design, they don't really comprise design as a whole. A design, if we're going by the literal dictionary definition, is a specification of a construction of an object or a system, whereas art is more the expression of human creative skill. To be good at design, in a nutshell, you want to send the same message to each viewer, but to be good at art, you want to send a different message to each viewer. So you don't necessarily need to be good at art, but you really need to have empathy and curiosity and a passion for solving problems. Another thing that really tripped me up in the beginning was the amount of sort of ambiguous job titles there were. Although a lot of these phrases have significant overlap, let's take a look at what the differences are. And keep in mind that a lot of these depend on which company you're applying to, and they may have different definitions. But in a nutshell, we can break it down into three overarching roles. We have designers that are focused on the experience of a product, such as a UX or a interaction designer. They work on user research, user flows, mapping the needs of the user, and building prototypes to test with the user. We then have designers that are more concerned with the look and feel of the product. These include visual and UI designers. Their jobs include building a pixel perfect UI, working on branding and graphic materials such as logos and banners, as well as design systems and design guidelines. And then we have the designers that are in touch with the business side of the product, such as product designers or UX writers. They work on how the product can relate to its marketing or business goals with the product manager usually. And it's sort of a combination of the visual and UX design fields. So now that we've sort of gone over the job titles and clearing up some misconceptions, let's go into the design thinking framework. I decided to compile all of the resources that I've linked in this workshop according to these sort of categories. So you can go through them at any stage in your project and refer to them at any point. The design process is kind of a framework that helps you create effective solutions that are user-centric and iterative. Those are the sort of keywords that you'll hear me say over and over again during this presentation. That means it isn't really a linear process, but rather you would go back and test and improve continuously. So the first stage is empathize, and this is where you want to collect the most user research, all of the insights. You want to define what is your problem statement and really answer the question, what is the problem? It's important that you really build a user-centric foundation and ensure that all your ideas going forward are meeting the user's needs so that you can constantly refer back to this and make sure that your product is relevant and that you are actually addressing the user's needs. The next stage would be define. So this is sort of where we're defining what success looks like for the product and what success looks like for the users and what process you'll take to achieve that. You're answering the question, why is it important? In this stage, some activities that you would be doing would be looking at how the user flow would look like, sort of hashing out what the overall experience will feel like, and really setting the framework for the rest of the project. You would then move on to the ideate phase. This is where you would go after doing all of the research and defining those key metrics of success. And you would sort of move on to how you can bring these ideas to life. The question we want to answer here is, how do we solve it? This is where you and your team should be collaborating in ideation, brainstorming, whiteboard sessions, and flesh out all of the ideas that you have on how you can solve the the product's problem that you identified earlier. Here you can start to really solidify what the features are that you want to prioritize and what the product will look and feel like. And then you will use all of this information, synthesize it to start the prototyping phase. This is where you're going to create your wireframes, your prototypes, any tangible iteration of the product, and you're going to be answering the question, how do we create it? Make sure that you're really synthesizing all of the information and relying on the user data so that you make sure that you're answering the need. Why is the design thinking process shown as an infinity sign? So it's good timing that you mentioned this. The last step, or I guess in this case, the step you'd want to do at every point in the process is testing. This is kind of where you want to validate all the assumptions you've made. And since this is not a linear process, testing is ideally something you'd want to do at every phase so that you can really validate your solutions at every phase and not really waste any efforts doing something that might not necessarily be addressing the user's needs. It's especially important in the prototype phase so that the actual tangible product that the user will be interacting with is validated and tested and you're clear on whether you need to improve it or not. So that's sort of why it's shaped in an infinity sign, but ideally the testing would be happening at every stage. And if you find something in the testing phase that, you know, makes you need to sort of rework things, you might need to go back to the empathize phase and kind of start it all over. And that's kind of what design is in a nutshell, is like that iterative process. How do you test? I'll actually go into that a little bit later when it comes to the resources, but it would basically be user interviews, user testing, a lot of like primary research methods. So now that we're familiar on how to structure these projects and what sort of process to take in the design thinking framework, I'll go over the resources that I've sort of bootstrapped along my journey and organize it step by step so that you can refer to it at any point in your project. Cool. So as I mentioned earlier, the first sort of phase in this process is empathizing and defining. This is where we want to understand the user's pain points and really understand where the user is coming from. A great way to conduct that research is to create interviews to gain insight. A great platform is Typeform. It's sort of comparable to Google Forms, except it's a lot more reader friendly if we're going with that UX sort of a theme. And this is a really great way for you to firsthand send out either surveys or interviews to help you really know what your user is feeling. And the second sort of resource that I have is lists. So a lot of these compilation lists are things that are more secondary research, but can really help you draw those insights. The first is a list of customer review pages, such as Amazon, Walmart, and other retailers. These reviews can really help you find that qualitative research and insights, especially if you want to know what your user is already feeling about competitors in your market. This can help towards driving that product market fit for your project and really help you see what's working and what's not working right now. The second is a list of comprehensive user interview questions that can help you draw the most insights from a position that's the least biased as possible. Sometimes we tend to ask questions that lead our users on. For instance, would you like to benefit from X, Y, and Z? Which is an almost obvious yes, for example. So being able to have those unbiased questions and really understand the user will help you draw the most insights for them. In this stage, the Ideate stage, you'll want to come up with how you're going to address the problem that you've identified. A framework that's really worked for me a lot is the Moscow framework. It stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. I know this is like a really forced mnemonic, but it's actually very useful in helping to plan out like the roadmap and where to allocate the time and resources effectively. So for instance, the must-haves would be non-negotiable items for your product. Should-haves would be important items, but not as important as the must-haves. Could-haves are sort of, you know, like nice-to-haves, and then the won't-haves are things that you don't want to be prioritizing for this product. It's really good at helping you, you know, not waste time because as much as the design process is so iterative, it's also very easy to get falling behind in this ideal design world. So this helps really create realistic roadmaps for your product. Another really great tool for the Ideate phase is Fingjam. This is a new feature that Figma has released, which I'm personally super excited for. And it allows you to work in real time with your team members to ideate and brainstorm for your project. A great thing is that it's built right into Figma, so you're able to switch between your prototype and your sort of ideation boards very quickly. But Miro, on the other hand, is also a very similar product that you can use for, you know, user flows, feature prioritization, and whatnot. And it's sort of been the industry leader up until now, before Fingjam kind of came into the picture. So it's also free to use, and it's a great way to collaborate. So I would suggest going through both of them and seeing which one you sort of vibe with more. But at the end of the day, the collaboration aspect of it is very useful for both of them. And I would highly recommend having those brainstorm sessions when you're in the ideate phase. Next, we have Figma. So after you focused on those main features, you've done all the ideation. This is when you get into the prototype phase, and it's time to build. One of my most favorite platforms is Figma. I've actually made this slide deck on Figma. And if you haven't already used it, it's a free open platform design software. And it's really great for prototyping. With a school email, you can actually access all of these features for free. There's like a premium plan. So I would highly recommend doing that if you have a school account. To learn how to use Figma, I would highly recommend a YouTube course that I actually used to learn all of my fundamentals, and it's called Building a Design System by Design Codes. It teaches you basically an end-to-end design project and all of the sort of processes that you would need in prototyping. So I would highly recommend that. And here are just some screenshots on how I've used Figma to create some design systems for my side projects, as well as prototypes. And one of my favorite features is that in the top right corner of the right panel, you can actually click inspect, and it'll give you CSS properties for whatever element in your project that you're selected. And this is really amazing because when you're working in a cross-functional team with developers, it makes handing it off a lot easier and super seamless. And it ensures that a lot of the design ideas that you have translate well into code. Adobe XD is also a very similar prototyping and design software. It's not free, however, it's included in the Adobe CC subscription. And a lot of the features have the same functionalities as Figma. And it's really, really good for animation and prototyping on that end, if that's what you're interested in, the sort of motion design. I've also linked some Adobe CC tutorials and LinkedIn learning tutorials that will help you strengthen your skills in XD. One thing to note is that XD does not have the sort of inspect tab like Figma does. So it is a little bit trickier to hand off to developers. But on the design side specifically, if you're doing maybe like a creative jam that Adobe hosts, this is a really great platform for that. Can Figma be used to make full apps? I've heard of some students using Figma to create hackathon projects. Yeah, so you can't really make functioning apps, but you can create the illusion of a functioning app through all of the prototyping and sort of the animation from page to page or component to component. So in a way, it's really good for presentation, but it would still need to be developed afterwards. Yes. Oh, okay. Thank you for answering that, Julie. So you've created all of these awesome, prototypes in Figma or Adobe XD. It's now time to test and validate your product. Amplitude is a really great platform, especially for web pages, if you wanted to conduct that sort of product analysis. And it allows you to view analytics such as retention rates, click-through rates, and heat maps, which is really important, which is basically like a chart that shows you where your user is clicking, where their eyes go to first. And it really helps you get a better understanding of like what the user's journey is in your product. This can help you validate all of those assumptions you made, and maybe you might point out some things that you could improve on, and that's the whole point of the testing sort of phase. I also want to touch upon some things that would help you after you're done your project and how you can display and sort of show off what you've learned. MockUp Studio is a really sick Figma plugin that you can use to create mockups of your products directly within Figma. So you can show off the beautiful interface as well as give people an idea of what it would look like on actual hardware, such as an iPhone or a kiosk or a tablet. Webflow is also a really awesome no-code website building platform. The reason I love it compared to things like Squarespace or Wix is that it isn't necessarily a standard drag and drop. It's more a visual, a sort of CSS builder. And if you don't have experience in HTML and CSS, it can be really daunting to sort of start a website from scratch. But if you wanted to make your portfolio, I would really recommend Webflow. There is a learning curve. However, Webflow does offer Webflow University, which is like their way of sort of onboarding you to their platform. It is a learning curve, but I would highly recommend Webflow. I think I made my portfolio in about a weekend. And I think it turned out pretty great, and I think it's something I'll stick to. So check this out if you have a couple projects under your belt and you'd want to show them in a portfolio. And then case studies. So if you get to the point where you have pretty much finished your project and you want to show off not only the skills you learned in the project, but also all the reflections and things you would do going forward, you should definitely write some case studies. In this link, I've linked some Medium articles on how to make those case studies, but it's a great way to really show people your growth as a designer. And I think this is the single most important thing when it comes to employability. So that could be a whole nother workshop in itself, but case studies are really important, and I would highly recommend going through Medium, maybe even just reading other people's case studies to get an idea of what it is you want to display. And finally, we have a community resource. So on Discord, there's a really amazing server called Design Buddies, and it is supposedly the world's largest design communities. Yeah, I see some people have already joined that community. It's really great because I feel like half the struggle when it comes to imposter syndrome regarding product design is you feel like you're going through it alone. Since there's no set education pathway, sometimes you'll be like the only one in your program pursuing UX or product design. So having a whole community that's there to support you is beyond valuable. You can critique your work. You can critique your or get your portfolio critiqued on this. You can share so many resources. There's so many events that are promoted to help you up your skills, lots of panels. Design Buddies is actually where I found my partner for a Adobe Creative Jam. I did, I think, last year, and we actually were runner-ups in that program. So it's a really great way to get that networking in and really show you that you're not going through this alone. And I would highly recommend joining it. So make sure to join that and introduce yourself. And I'm sure you'll come across even more resources that are helpful. And that concludes the resources that I've sort of bootstrapped over the years on my design journey. I thank you so much for attending, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or any other social media. I'd be happy to, get that networking down and, connect with as many designers as possible. I'd like to open the floor to any questions you guys might have, whether that be about design or whether that be about the resources specifically. And you could just enter those in the chat box. Thank you, Andy. What's next for me? Well, as I mentioned, I'm wrapping up my my internship in UX design this summer, and I'll be doing more of a content design internship next semester, so in the fall. So right now, I'd still say I'm very new in my design journey. So absorbing all of these different practices of design, such as content design, which I've never worked in before, is something that I plan on doing for the next couple of years before honing in on, like a specific practice. But that's sort of what's next for me, is just experiencing these internships, working on extracurricular projects such as TOHacks to help me get a broader understanding of design. Will this link to these slides be shared? Thanks. Yes, they will be shared, and you will be able to access all of these. What do you do at your UX design internship day-to-day tasks? So I guess I'll go through like a typical day. It'll start off with a stand-up update with my team. I work at a startup, so it's a pretty small team. So everyone from the developers to the business side is there. I then, let them know what I'm going to be doing for the day, and then I head off and sort of do my own work. What I usually do is I'll, depending on what stage it is in the product that I'm working on, I'll either be doing some user testing. I'll either be, looking at analytics from the products that we've already put out, and then I'll be prototyping based on those. So creating mockups or, early stage wireframes for some of the products that we're working on. And then some days I'll have, like testing sessions where I'll go in location or I'll do things remotely to draw those insights. And then it'll kind of be back to the drawing board from there. So it's kind of a cyclical process, and my day-to-days tend to follow that design framework that I was mentioning earlier. Yeah, those are heavy questions, Andy. What attracts you to design stuff? I think when I was in like business school, I really had a fascination for the tech side of things. But developing specifically kind of wasn't exactly fun to me. So I think design was a really great way for me to like combine my business, because in a way design, you have to think about the user a lot, which is very similar to what marketing is. And so it was kind of a really great entryway for me into tech, where I was able to use the skills I already had, but also learn some new skills when it comes to these like sort of technical softwares. And I think that's what basically attracted me to this field, design in general. We have time for one last question. If you could do uni again, would you still have entered business, or would you have gone to another enter tech focused program? I don't necessarily regret going to university for business, because I think design is really cool in that there's people from so many different fields. So I do, as much as it feels like I'm not doing something I love when it comes to education, I do feel like I'm able to bring my own like perspective to the table, and that's through my business education. And I think that's like the beauty of design to me. So if I could do uni again, I think I still would actually go to business school, because I feel like it's equipped me with so many things that sort of help make me unique as a designer. And I think that can apply to anyone of any major or degree. Okay, I think that might be it for the time we have for questions. But thank you guys once again for attending the workshop, and I hope you guys were able to take something away from this. And I hope to see you guys at our future events as well.